My employees and I are hard at work at making our company the best omnimedia company in the world, Jane. And we will continue to do that. And I want to focus on my salad because that's why we're...
But first, we must have the perfect introduction. Welcome to the PR Breakdown, the podcast dissecting the biggest reputation management stories making headlines. I'm your host, Molly McPherson, and today we're diving into Martha Stewart's latest venture into reputation repair, her Netflix documentary, Martha. But this isn't just any celebrity documentary. This is a masterclass in image rehabilitation with a side of unexpected revelations that would make even Martha's perfectly folded napkins wrinkle. First, let me take you back to a moment that perfectly encapsulates the time, the crisis, and Martha's initial crisis response strategy, or lack thereof. In what became an infamous moment, it was a meme before the term meme even existed. It was a morning interview with CBS. At the time, CBS television was trying so hard to make a mark in morning news. ABC was always the leader for years. Good Morning America was always in the lead. Joan London, Charlie Gibson. Before that, it was David Hartman. Then the Today Show made its way to the first place spot, led a lot by the transition to Katie Couric and then eventually to Matt Lauer. And then, of course, the political landscape in the 2000 election with Tim Russert doing double duty on Meet the Press and then on the Today Show. CBS was always lagging. But at this time, CBS was clearly looking for ways to make news, which is why they likely allowed this moment to happen. I don't think you would ever see an interview set up like this again. And when you watch it in the documentary, and by the way, you won't be able to find this interview online. It is gone. I was able to grab a clip from someone who grabbed an old clip. That's the only reason why you're hearing it on this podcast. I could not find it anywhere. So Martha Stewart made sure that this clip was gone. She probably worked with CBS, or maybe even CBS did it on their own, because it really is a bad look, not only for Martha Stewart, but for CBS. They completely cornered Martha Stewart. They brought her in to do a segment that she would typically do. You know, she's cooking. In this case, she was making a salad. This salad became the most problematic salad that Martha Stewart has likely ever made. Now, at that time, CBS News was trying to make a name for themselves. For years, they have been trying to make their mark in morning television. I would argue they're still trying to make a mark in morning television. And the format that they have now, which is very heavy news-centric, is similar to the format that they had back then when this interview took place. Good Morning America has always been in the lead for years. It was David Hartman with Joan London, and then Charlie Gibson, who was a newsreader. He took over. They were always in first place. The Today Show, NBC, was always second. And then with the political becoming more of a news talking point, the Today Show started making waves, often with the coverage from elections, with Tim Russert pulling double duty, not only on Meet the Press, but they would often pull him into the morning show. Like every Monday morning, he would talk about politics. So eventually, the Today Show took over GMA, and it was Katie Couric now and Matt Lauer, and they did a great job balancing heavy news and celebrity. But CBS was always lagging behind. Now, if you remember at this time, and boy, do I remember the whole Martha Stewart years, reading the New York Post, like the paper New York Post, like every single day. Andrea Peyser, she's a columnist who Martha Stewart said in the documentary was dead, and she's very much alive. But the New York Post was absolutely brutal on Martha. Now back to CBS. CBS did Martha Stewart no favors. They brought her on in a typical segment, a regular segment. Jane Clayson came in so hard and so heavy. It was such a bad producing moment too for CBS because it looked like they blindsided her. They probably said, hey, we're just going to touch on it for a moment. And then we're going to move on to your salad, because Martha was prepared with statements, but it wasn't the statement that Jane was looking for. Take a listen to the clip and you can see why it was so devastating to CBS, for one, but also to Martha.
You've released a statement saying that you were not involved in any insider trading, but you haven't publicly commented on this. What do you say about the allegations here?
Well, as you understand, I'm involved in an investigation that has very serious implications. The investigation really centers around ImClone and its drug called Erbitux, which many of us thought had great potential and probably does still have great potential for curing cancer in seriously ill patients. So, and many people are involved in this whole investigation, and I'm just not at liberty at this time to make any comments whatsoever, and I certainly hope that the matter is resolved in the very near future.
Well, the latest twist in this story is the fact that your stockbroker was suspended from Merrill Lynch, and that seems to have put more focus on you in this whole situation of you selling your share of ImClone stocks on December 27th. Are you worried that what he did might further complicate matters for you?
Well, again, I have nothing to say on the matter. I'm really not at liberty to say.
That moment, friends, is what we call in crisis communications a self-inflicted wound. Instead of addressing the situation head-on, Martha retreated into her comfort zone, quite literally into her salad prep. It became a late-night punchline, and it was more like a meme before we had memes. But more importantly, it became a symbol of her inability to confront the crisis directly. She did have a statement, but you could tell everything was straight from a lawyer. Here's where things get a little juicy for Martha. And it's where you need to pay attention if you are in a crisis or someone who you work with or a company that you work with. Martha made what I call a cardinal sin of crisis response. She let the lawyers run the show. So let's break down what happened. Martha Stewart sold her ImClone stock after receiving information from her broker. Her broker was Peter Bekanovic, and he called Martha on her way to Mexico. She was with friends going on a trip, and there was a lot of back and forth conjecture. This conversation came into the court case. What was Martha told? What did Martha know? And why did Martha do what she did when she was given this information? And not just by her broker, but also by her broker's assistant, who will come in and absolutely bury Martha Stewart. The transaction itself was about $45,000. The cost to her reputation and her company due to this court case, billions. But here's the kicker. Had she come out immediately with a transparent explanation, she might be telling a very different story today. And it would not be the story of someone who went to prison. Because she did not speak up at the time, and if you watch this documentary, you will hear Martha essentially say that her lawyers would not let her speak. Her lawyers wanted her to say, I do not recall, I do not recall, I do not recall. That's the type of language that doesn't match with her reputation for being a perfectionist. James Comey, who brought down Hillary Clinton during the campaign against Donald Trump, was the district attorney in New York at the time, the Southern District Court in New York. He is the person responsible for turning all of this legal complications to Martha Stewart. He wanted Martha Stewart's head on a perfect platter. And it was clear, even back at the time, everything seemed so unfair. But Martha boxed herself into a corner by not saying what she knew, by being less than transparent in her answers. It gave Comey more leverage to get the press to point the fingers at Martha. If Martha just would have been more open, a little more vulnerable, and admitted exactly what the broker told her to do, she would not have been caught up in all of it. Now, the documentary strategy is an interesting one. So now we're going to fast forward to 2024. And here's where things get fascinating from a PR point of view. Martha did cooperate with this documentary. She didn't executive produce it. And that decision, well, I'll call that a bit of a strategic masterstroke. By allowing RJ Cutler to maintain creative control of the documentary, it was his documentary, Martha was able to pull off something somewhat remarkable here. She got all of the benefits of a documentary platform without the criticism of it being a vanity project. There was a review in Vulture that nailed it when they noted how the documentary managed to be both damning and admiring. It's like Martha found a way to have her cake and eat it too. And we know she'd never serve a store-bought cake. It's going to be prepared perfectly. And you must watch this documentary. So some of the more revealing moments, Martha admitting that she still doesn't understand why she was prosecuted, like really breaking it down and explaining the confusion behind it. And you can follow it directly. She's essentially blaming the lawyers without coming out and saying, I blame the lawyers. She's clearly blaming the lawyers. Also, Martha showing deep, deep, deep vulnerability over her then husband, Andy Stewart, having an affair in their home with one of her employees. Also, the footage of a helicopter landing at her Bedford estate. Her casual mention of dating Anthony Hopkins, but ending it because she couldn't stop thinking about the actor. And the scene where she's teaching Snoop Dogg to fold fitted sheets. This documentary threads a needle perfectly. It does include clips of Martha being difficult, even now, being a perfectionist. But if you remember the Martha of that time, that's why people, yes, didn't love her, but that's why they loved her. Being a perfectionist was her brand. So to see her bristle or to be sharp with people because something wasn't perfect fit her reputation. So that's why she was so incredibly popular. And if you watch her and you watch timelines, Oprah Winfrey was gunning for her as well. They show clips from the Oprah Winfrey Show. And what do you know? Oprah Winfrey followed the Martha Stewart Omni Media playbook. Now, there have been other celebrity documentaries out there. There's Taylor Swift's Miss Americana, carefully curated. Pamela Anderson's Pamela, A Love Story, deeply personal but controlled. Selena Gomez's My Mind and Me, raw but protective. Ellen DeGeneres' attempted comeback, a carefully worded apology, which I personally think fell completely flat because it didn't fit her reputation. But Martha, she showed herself berating employees over wrinkled sheets, which could be a PR nightmare. But somehow, with Martha, it works. Why? Because it feels authentic. Now, back to the ex-husband bombshell. Here's where things get a little spicy. And I'm not talking about the perfect paprika chicken recipe. It's spicy with Andy Stewart and Andy Stewart speaking up. Now, if you watch this documentary, you're going to wonder, what does Andy Stewart think of this documentary? Because she absolutely throws him under the bus. This week, Andy Stewart and his current wife spoke to People magazine, of course, about Martha's documentary revelations. Let me read you a bit of what Andy said. And if you work in PR, just pay attention to this. Quote, the documentary is basically a retrospective of Martha's favorite subject, herself. Ouch. His current wife added that Martha's portrayal of their divorce was very one-sided and self-serving. Not surprising because it's her documentary. Now, the public response has been fascinating. One post on social media said, she's not sorry, and I kind of love it. I would have to second with that. And another one said, Martha walks so Gwyneth could run. That would be Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop. This is giving girl boss energy before girl boss was even a thing. That is the type of reaction that she is getting over this documentary. I mean, one, it is a great documentary, but it does show how she was so unfairly attacked. And at that time, being a boss woman, being a woman, and someone who made such a cultural impact, she was penalized for it. There is no doubt about it. So this is a public response that I find fascinating. She's basically saying, I'm not sorry. I am not sorry. What are some of the lessons that we can learn from the Martha playbook? One, never let legal strategy completely override your communication strategy. I call this the Lizzo effect. Two, sometimes the best defense is a good documentary. That's your offense. Three, when crafting your narrative, remember that other stakeholders have their own stories to tell. And sometimes if those stories aren't so great, it can make your story even more authentic. But 4, authenticity doesn't always mean likability. But 5, if you can own your reputation and likability isn't necessarily a part of it, go ahead, double down on it, own it. Don't try and change it, own it. And that is exactly what Martha did. She's owning exactly who she is and who she always was. Now, the meta moment. Here's where the documentary makes a particularly brilliant PR perspective. It's both a reputation repair tool and a brand reinforcement vehicle. When Martha shows up late to filming or nitpicks about set decoration, she's simultaneously acknowledging her difficult reputation while also justifying it. She is explaining why she is that way. So the real success of this documentary strategy isn't just that it's repairing her image. It's that it's making her previous quote unquote flaws feel like features, not bugs. In today's authenticity obsessed culture, that might just be the perfect recipe for reputation rehabilitation. That's all for this episode of the PR Breakdown. Remember, in the world of crisis communication, sometimes the best defense is a really good documentary. So thanks for listening. I want to remind you that every reputation crisis is an opportunity for redemption. Just make sure that you're the one telling the story, or at least controlling who tells it. Bye for now.